Essentially, the whole reason you have multiple versions of the same film that exist is because somebody was unhappy with it. And typically it's the director, right? I mean, unless the director has final cut, which very few directors do, it's the studio paying for the production and paying all the bills. And if they want it a certain length or they want certain things edited out, well, they're going to get their way. So years later, the director goes back and releases the director's cut the way that they wanted it. The point I'm trying to make is that I just watched Apocalypse Now Redux, which is the second of 3 versions of Apocalypse Now by Francis Ford Coppola. What does that mean? Well, it means that Apocalypse Now was released back in the day. It was way over budget. They shot too much footage. There was all kinds of shenanigans going on the set with the different actors. Coppola thought it was going to be a disaster. The studio thought it was going to be a disaster. And they went with a theatrical cut. They released it. And of course, the rest is history, right? Maybe not at first, but we know how that story went. Decades later, in like 2001, you get a release of Apocalypse Now Redux, which is an hour of extra footage, maybe felt like 3.5 hours. Is that right? I just got done watching that, which is the second version of that film that came out in 2001. And then there's the Goldilocks version, which is 2019 release, which is sort of a hybrid of the two because people complained, or some people complained, that there was too much footage, that it talked about too many things, or you revisited certain characters or scenes that shouldn't have been revisited. So there's like this hot debate about which one is the actual Apocalypse Now, which leads me to the point of this video, which is, how the fuck do we know which is the real one? Look, nothing is ever finished, right? I mean, if we're talking about painting, we're talking about film, poetry. If you could dig up Van Gogh and do a Frankenstein thing and let him touch up his paintings, don't you think that he would probably do it? I'm sure that he would. If you could get Keats back on board and back writing again, don't you think he would look at some of his poetry and be like, well, actually, I don't like this word there. Let me try a different version of this. It's never going to end. I understand what time does to art because as a multidisciplinary artist and filmmaker, I'm always going back and looking at things and doing this. Oh God, what was I thinking? But that never ends. So why is it that we have 3 different versions of this masterpiece? And I would say that they're all pretty much masterpieces, but they're just different versions of the same masterpiece. Now, I wouldn't compare it to Star Wars, but it's similar in that regard, in that Lucas went back and tried to add on different things because I don't know what the reasoning was. Maybe it was technology was available that wasn't available at the time, but he mucked it all up. And now when you watch it, I don't know which version I'm watching, but I'm hoping it's not the extra Jabba footage one. But sticking with Apocalypse Now, the reason this is so confusing, obviously, is because there are 3 different versions. And people are going to watch a movie, unless they're cinephiles like you and like me, they're not going to look up and see, wait a minute, let me see the timeline here of these 3 different versions. Why was this released? What's the extra? What's the debate here? What's the hot topic of these? Why is this one? No, they're just going to skip it and go to something else. Or they're going to watch whatever one's available. Are we supposed to have multiple versions of each title on Netflix and Criterion and Prime and all this? No, of course not. I'm sure Francis Ford Coppola is a very nice person. He's clearly great at filmmaking. But when you let somebody redo something, it's never going to go right. You know what I mean? What you finished is you just got to walk away from it. I'm not giving advice to Francis Ford Coppola, by the way. I'm just saying in general, I think it would have been better if he just left it alone. And I'm not saying that Apocalypse Now Redux doesn't have some great moments. Nothing's ever really finished, is it? People aren't finished. The things they create aren't finished. We got to I think, this is just my 2 cents here. I think we just got to cook it, serve it, and let it go and move on. I can kind of understand a little bit, and this is where I'm going to contradict myself. I do understand the director's cut in certain ways because there's pressures put on people, particularly people who maybe I would assume young filmmakers or people who haven't, by young, I don't mean age necessarily. I just mean people who haven't made big feature films, and they've got to sort of compromise because they haven't proven that they can turn over great profits at the box office. And then later on, when they have the ability or have shown the ability, or they have like this idea that didn't occur to them in terms of the footage that already exists, I understand why you might release a director's cut, because clearly there are examples, and please put your favorite example of that below, of a director's cut that you think is better than the theatrical cut. But outside of that, I really think it's a big mistake to go back and tinker with things like, you know what you're doing. Because in a way, you're kind of time traveling and you don't know how it's going to react. You know, you could go back in time, essentially, to where you're editing in Apocalypse Now in the jungle or wherever they're doing it in 1960, whatever. But you're in 2001 or 2019. Why are you doing that? But I want to get into a few things about Redux that I think are important because, and I want to know what you think, but first I'm going to tell you what I think, because I think it's important to talk about. The two scenes in particular are the extra Playboy Bunnies scene and then the French Plantation. So the argument against having the Playboy Bunny scene come back is because we're already up the river. It's slowing things down. Why are we revisiting it in terms of like pacing? I don't like the idea of it being back, but that's not the reason. The reason is it's so dark because you kind of, as I'm watching it, this is just how I felt. When I was watching it, I was thinking, yeah, this is kind of what I thought was going to happen to them. And I don't want to look at it because it's horrific. You know, you kind of got the impression that they were never going to be allowed to leave, that they were going to experience some sort of a really violent, horrible thing out in the jungle. You know, it's terrible. And I don't like to think about it. I think for this particular scene, I think it's a good idea to just kind of leave it behind. And I don't remember what the Goldilocks version does, but in Redux, I think it's unnecessary. Now, with the French Plantation scene, I'm kind of mixed on this one because on the one hand, I think it does slow it down. As somebody put in a comment that I read somewhere, stopping for dinner for 45 minutes was a bad idea. And I think it's true. It does slow down the movie because we're heading upriver. Why are we stopping the story to talk about this other thing? It's related, but it does slow the story down. But here's what I'm thinking as I'm watching it. I think the conversation is interesting. I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't annoyed by the French at the table arguing about politics and colonialism. I just found it annoying. I didn't really find that I got anything from it. There were moments where I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was interesting when they arrived on the boat. It was very, ominous, and like with the way that the soldiers and all that was really interesting. But at a certain point at the dinner table, I just started looking at my watch, like, are we going to listen to these guys yell about stuff? I get that they're talking about colonialism or they're making some really interesting points. And I'm not saying that I disagree with what they're saying. I'm just saying the manner in which they said it, I found annoying. And it sort of just had me feeling like I got to get away from this dinner table and get back on the boat. But let me say this. What I thought was really interesting about it was that Martin Sheen's character is basically kind of there for lust. He sees that beautiful French woman. He's there. He's listening to these guys yell, but he's looking at that woman and she's looking at him. And of course, we know what happens. And that, I think, to me, was what stood out and why I think it works a little bit, only because to me, it felt like life, the love, the lust, the life in that feeling in that moment, and him making eye contact with her and vice versa, and them getting together, almost like a one last moment to enjoy being alive before he heads into the darkness, because Kurtz's little village there is death. That's what it is. It's death. And this, to me, was one last reminder that some of the great things about life, not yelling people about politics at the table, but, lust and life and all that. So to have that aspect hit you, that element hit you before you finish the journey and head up to Colonel Kurtz, where it's just death and carnage and all that, I thought it was kind of fascinating. But I do think that it went in for too long. I don't know if maybe I would have felt the same about him making eye contact with the woman, the French woman, if there wasn't that table discussion. Maybe I wouldn't have felt the same. And I don't know what he was thinking as he was constructing this scene or putting it together in 2000 or whenever he did it. but I do think that that made it more interesting to me. You know, I have to say, watching it this time, and I haven't watched it in a long time, I felt really emotional for some reason. There was something about it that was different other than the additional, and I'm talking about Redux because that's what I just watched. Obviously the additional stuff, and when you add footage, you add music and score. So maybe I'm hearing things that I didn't hear before, or they're hitting me in a different way. But I really connected with this thing as a masterpiece. I don't know that Redux is my favorite version. I don't know. There's too many versions. I can't really tell you. I would have to sit down and watch all three of them in the same day, and ain't nobody got time for that. But it was really just a masterpiece, like just brilliant and horrible and tragic and scary. And there were moments where Kurtz, every time I listen to Kurtz talk, I think, God, this guy is a fucking nut. And then also there's a part of me that thinks, and I don't know if this is crazy to say, but I'm also thinking, like, is he making a little bit of sense here? Like, I'm not saying I agree with his methods. You know, I don't see a method, actually, sir. But there are moments where I think, yeah, he's really good at talking people into his shit, you know? And maybe that's how you get an island of people or whatever it is, a little village there to do all this crazy stuff. But that was one of the things that elevated on this viewing for me, was just how bananas all this stuff was. But then also I understood at least a little bit of maybe the perspective he had on everything. Even if it's fucking horrific and I don't like it, I kind of understood what he was talking about, the strength of it. I don't know, maybe I need to think about that more. Maybe I shouldn't put that in here, but I'm just being honest, and it's fresh on my mind, and I'm just kind of working out my thoughts. Even my thoughts of this video are not the same. If I make this video 5 minutes from now and call it the director's cut, even though this is the director's cut, I might have a different version. So nothing's ever finished, including videos like this. So I really want to know what you think. I want to know which version you think is right. What are your thoughts on the existence of multiple versions in the first place? I mean, sometimes I think it's okay, but generally speaking, it would be nice to live in a world where there's just one version, right? I mean, it gets confusing. I think theatrical and directors is fine. But when you're getting into three, it just starts to make me think that maybe you just don't know what you're doing, or maybe you just got lucky. I don't know. Obviously, Coppola's a great filmmaker, but, you know, it's confusing. But I want to know what you think. What are your thoughts on Redux? What do you think about the French Plantation aspect that I was talking about? And is there anything else to Redux that you think, that you want to say something about, that you think is important to keep in, or that it was important to reinsert, assuming that you're a fan of the tinkering? All right, Apocalypse Now Redux. It's fantastic. It's long, but fantastic.